Good morning. Thank you for being here. I'm Ontario County District Attorney Jim Ritz, and I am joined this morning by Sue Ann Cross, the mother of Staci Ackerman, retired Sheriff Phil Pavro, and retired Rochester Police Department investigator Bob Searsma. Retired Judge and Ontario County District Attorney James Harvey and investigator Lynn Prescott of the Rochester Police Department were not able to be here. We've also been in contact with Staci's father Dave and her brothers Jason and Todd, who reside out of state, and they could not join us in person, but they are here in spirit. On September 11th of 1986, 8-year-old Staci Ackerman was brutally murdered and sexually assaulted in her bed in Farmington, New York by Gregory Flint. Gregory Flint was not a stranger to the Ackerman family. Studies have shown that more than 90% of abusers are people that children know, love, and trust. On September 9th of 1986 into September 10th of 1986, Flint was permitted to stay on the couch at the Ackerman home in Farmington so he could attend court on September 10th, where he faced a felony charge of driving while intoxicated. He went to court on the 10th. That evening, all of the kids went to bed. Staci's mom, Sue Ann, and Sue Ann's boyfriend, Kenny, were watching TV and fell asleep. Around 8:30, Flint called and talked to Sue Ann and Kenny. Later, around 11, Sue Ann and Kenny went to bed just down the hall from Staci's room. The morning of September 11th, Sue Ann went about her normal duties. She woke up. She was getting ready for work. She filled out a form for her son, Todd. Around 6:30, Kenny leaves for work. He took out the garbage, and Sue Ann yelled for Todd to wake up. He was in a room in the basement. He answered. She went upstairs to wake Staci and Jason. When she told Staci to wake up, there was not any response. Sue Ann then went into Jason's room, and he didn't immediately respond either. Sue Ann shook his foot. He jumped up and said, "Okay." Sue Ann returned to Staci. She shook her foot, and Staci did not respond. Sue Ann crawled into bed next to Staci and gave her a kiss, and Staci did not respond. At that point, Sue Ann noticed Staci was cold. She shook Staci more vigorously without effect. At that point, Sue Ann ran out to Kenny, who was just leaving. She told him something was wrong, and Kenny returned to the house. Kenny also tried to wake up Staci, and he yelled for Sue Ann to call an ambulance. While they waited, Sue Ann attempted to resuscitate Staci, giving her mouth-to-mouth. Staci did not respond. The ambulance likewise attempted to resuscitate Staci. Ultimately, they rushed Staci to Thompson Hospital, where she was pronounced dead. At that point, an investigation started, and Flint was questioned a couple times. Initially, he denied being at Sue Ann and Kenny's at all on September 11th. During the investigation, Lynn Prescott and Bob Searsma responded to the sheriff's office. They had a history with Flint and felt they might be able to talk to him because of their rapport. Ultimately, Flint confessed to going to the Ackerman home and going inside. He snuck up to the bedrooms where he passed by Jason's room and Sue Ann and Kenny's room, where he found Staci asleep. He touched her, and she woke up and called for her brother. Although she apparently recognized Flint and stopped screaming, Flint did not leave. He horribly and violently sexually assaulted Staci and murdered her in her own bed, and then he fled. On January 29th of 1987, Flint was convicted of 2 counts of murder in the second degree, 2 counts of rape in the first degree, 2 counts of sodomy in the first degree, and 1 count of manslaughter in the first degree. Judge George Reed sentenced the defendant to the maximum sentence of 37.5 years to life in prison on March 3rd of 1987. In 1987, times were different. You could expect a life sentence to result in multiple parole denials, and you could have a hope that a life sentence would really result in a life sentence. Unfortunately, we are in a much different time. Flint is parole eligible, and his hearings are scheduled in the next 2 months. Sue Ann Cross has tracked Flint's movements as he was in prison, as she's permitted to. She fears every time she looks that his status will be released. A life sentence used to result in an expectation that there would be a lifetime of parole supervision. Now New York has created a system that will not supervise Gregory Flint for the rest of his life if he is released. I just recently had the pleasure of meeting Sue Ann Cross, It is not a surprise that she continues in her grief and fear of Flint, and the concern that if released, he will exact further revenge upon Sue Ann and her family. She carries a guilt that is not hers, as do Staci's father and brothers. The fact that this monster might soon be released is almost too much to bear for a family, for a community that were devastated by his perverted and savage acts. As a result, we have created a petition for our community to sign to inform the Department of Corrections and Community Supervision and the Board of Parole that we support Staci and that we support Staci's family, and we remember the evil that is Gregory Flint. Gregory Flint is an evil man. He made sure he did not leave any witnesses when he savagely murdered Staci Ackerman. He confessed that he had fantasized about young girls in the past. He confessed that he was sexually aroused by Staci fighting for her life. Despite his confession, Flint put the Ackerman family through hell in a trial, unwilling to accept any responsibility for what he had done. He should not be released. Gregory Flint should not be paroled. He should not be paroled until Staci is paroled from her death. Gregory Flint should not be paroled until Staci's family is paroled from their grief. Gregory Flint should not be paroled until Staci's family is paroled from the pain and the stolen memories of graduation, of marriage, and of children she can never have. Gregory Flint should never be paroled. As we realize none of this will ever happen for Staci and her family, we realize that Gregory Flint is far too dangerous a man to ever be paroled from state prison. I would like to introduce and ask Sue Ann Cross to go ahead and make her some statements.
I'm not a public speaker, so be patient. My name is Sue Cross, and I am Staci Ackerman's mother. Staci Ackerman was my beautiful 8-year-old daughter until September 11, 1986, when she was raped and murdered in her own bed by Greg Flint. It's difficult to describe the pain of missing a child, a physical and mental toll that it takes on a daily basis. There is no rest or escape from such a loss. Only the need to take care of my boys did keep me alive. It was hard. I'm a mother of 3 beautiful children, and when asked by a stranger or acquaintance, how many children do you have? I still pause, tears well up in my eyes, and I can barely catch my breath and struggle to speak the words. I have 3 children and typically feel the need to explain that my daughter was murdered in order to explain her absence. I have learned to cope with this loss. I've learned coping strategies to allow myself periods of time each day to remember Staci, to grieve her absence, and to think about all the missing out on mother and daughter, and considering the impact her murder had on my 2 boys. Since that day in September of 1986, I have experienced feelings of anxiety, anger, frustration, and extreme fear. A fear that something could happen to one of my other children, to one of my boys. It's so scary. Greg Flint entered my home in the middle of the night while we all slept. I assure you, there is nothing more haunting. Oh, wait a minute, I missed. Okay, while we all slept. He murdered my sweet daughter, Staci, while we all slept. I can assure you there's nothing more haunting than knowing this happened in your home, where we all supposed to feel safe and secure. I was just down the hall. Greg Flint is a predator, and took advantage of our kindness and then stole the life of my child, my beautiful Staci. He took her from us in such a violent way. He raped and murdered her in her own bed. Greg Flint is a predator who sneaks his way into people's lives with the intent of destruction. This kind of evil cannot be mended, regardless of how many years he serves in prison. Please help me and Staci's family to keep Greg Flint in a secure facility so he can't hurt another family. No child in any community is safe if Greg Flint is out of prison. This is not a crime of passion or a moment of anger. This was a predator hunting his prey, and his prey was my 8-year-old daughter. Greg Flint confessed to the crime. Please help us keep him in a secure facility so he doesn't hurt another family, or maybe he'll come after mine again. Please help us.
Sue Ann, know that for as long as you need us,
Thank you.
and as long as he is parole eligible, we will be with you to support you to the end of time. If there are questions, certainly we're willing to answer.
Sir, just in layman's terms, explain this process again, like how this person is able to see the light of day after such a horrific crime, even 40 years later. You talked about some things with the state and different day and age.
So in 1987, the maximum sentence he could receive is what he received, 37 and a half years to life in prison. We have certainly seen an evolution and an erosion of parole. Really the ability of parole to make a decision, the ability of parole to hold people. It used to be that you would never see a murderer who was released on his first parole date. Now we're over 40% of people are being released. There was a time when there were indeterminate sentences, as when Flint was sentenced, where it was an indeterminate sentence for violent sex offenses, and he's the beneficiary of that, because instead of getting 25 years flat with 20 years or 30 years of post-release supervision, Flint got an indeterminate sentence. And so that makes him parole eligible because of the sentencing structure at that time. And so at that 37 and a half years, again in 1987, I'm sure the expectation was he would spend the majority of his life, if not his entire life, in prison. Now we're seeing people released, and far too often at their first parole date.
And every 2 years we have to do this.
Right. So once he is denied, every 2 years he is eligible for release. He's eligible for the hearings, and so this is something we'll again torture Sue Ann, her sons, Staci's dad.
Jim, the system does account for rehabilitation and correction. Why do you think that hasn't happened with this guy?
Well, first of all, he knew not to leave a witness. So he knew at the time he committed this crime that he needed to murder Staci. He was charged, he was sexually excited by the fact that Staci struggled for her life. I don't know how you fix that. I don't know in what world you fix that. And he's a child, and he's a predator. He picks on children. He took an 8-year-old and did things that are unspeakable. It's just, you can't fix that. There's not a chance in the world you can fix that.
The family's putting out the petition and making the statement, taking the time and producing the courage to talk today. Does that have an influence? Can that have an influence from your experience on a parole board?
The goal is with the petition that the community speaks, and that will, hopefully have an impact. Sue Ann and Dave, Staci's father, have the opportunity to make statements, videotape. They don't have to go and be in person. they also have the ability to write statements. Those will absolutely be considered and can have an impact on parole's decision as to whether or not to release him. And I'm sure that when we combine those things, the statement will be clear.
And when you do have a sexual assault on top of a murder, from your experience, or just looking at the numbers, does that increase the possibility of a denial?
That's the hope. Again, in 1987, I'd have said absolutely. As we sit here today, I hope that it results in a denial, and I hope it results in him being rolled time and time and time again. Again, there is no community that is safe if he is released.